This section, 10.2, is not in your book. So we're going to take a break from the book you currently have. So the notes we're going to do now, I want you to write in a spiral or your separate notebook. 10.2, square root equations. Now you've already graphed squared roots, but we're going to start with our key idea. Your key idea is what you need to know. The key idea states that squaring each side of an equation would be equal to the two expressions. So, in words, if two expressions are equal, then their squares are also equal. For example, in algebra, if a equals b, then a squared would equal b squared. So let's start with a pre-example. We're going to start with the squared root of x equals 9. The square root of x equals 9. In order to solve this equation, the square root of x equals 9, we have to do the opposite of square rooting something. The opposite of taking the square root of a number is squaring it. So just like, the opposite of adding something is subtraction, the opposite of taking the square root of something is squaring it. So we can square both sides. Now, the square root of x times the square root of x is the square root of x squared, which is just x. So the square root of x times the square root of x, if you square something, it is the opposite of the square root, so they cancel. So this answer would be x equals 81. So let's start an example. Example number 1. The square root of x, let me make a better x here. The square root of x plus 5 equals 13. The first thing we have to do is isolate the square root of x. So we're going to subtract 5 on both sides. The square root of x equals 8. And now all I do is just square both sides. The square root of x squared is just x equals 64. So your answer would be x equals 64. And if you plugged it back in, the square root of 64 is 8 plus 5 is 13. So we want to check to make sure it does prove true. Number 2, 3 minus the square root of x equals 0. Step 1 is subtracting 3 on both sides. We then get the square root, the negative square root of x equals negative 3. We can divide by negative 1. That gives us the square root of x equals 3. Square both sides, x would equal 9. Now we could have also done this. I'm just going to move the square root of x over. And so the opposite of minus is plus. I could have gotten that. And you would have gotten the same answer of x equals 9. Example number 3. Let's do 2 times the square root of x plus 5 equals 13. Step 1, we're going to subtract 5 on both sides. So that gives me 2 times the square root of x equals 8. Divide by 2, you get the square root of x equals 4. Now square both sides, you get x equals 16. So our answer is 16. Example number 4. 4 times the square root of x plus 2 plus 3 equals 19. First step is subtract 3 on both sides. So we're going to get 4 times the square root of x plus 2 equals 16. Remember, we want to get the square root by itself. We now divide each side by 4. That gives us the square root of x plus 2 equals 4. I now square both sides. The square root and the squared cancel. So that gives me x plus 2 equals 16. I now subtract 2. You get x equals 14. And if you do plug this in, we check your solution. 14 plus 2 gives you the square root of 16, which is 4. Times 4 is 16, plus 3 is 19. This does work. Now in this equation, the square root of 2x minus 1 equals the square root of x plus 4. you have two terms that are being taken to a square root. So they both have to be on either side. So you have to get one square root on one side, one square root on the other. All we do now, square both sides. We get 2x minus 1 equals x plus 4. And now we just solve the equation. Two-step equation, subtract x. That's a really bad x. So we subtract x on both sides, you get x minus 1 equals 4. Then we add 1, we get x equals 5. If you plug it in, it will work. Your solution is x equals 5. So why don't you try this example on your own to see if you know what you're doing, and then you can solve it and see if you got it right. The square root of x equals the square root of 5x minus 1. Pause the video and solve it. What you should have done is square both sides. That gives you x equals 5x minus 1. Subtract 5x. That gives you negative 4x equals negative 1. Divide by negative 4. Your answer is 25 hundredths or 1/4. So your answer is 1/4.